It will be a long time. That's what President Donald Trump is saying about when he will speak next with Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada. What does this mean for the fate and future of trade negotiations between Canada and the United States? To break it all down, I'm joined by Sean Speer, co-founder, editor-at-large at The Hub. Hey, Sean.
Yeah, it sure seems like a fast-moving file these days, doesn't it, Rudyard?
Yeah, what a wild 72 hours. This Ronald Reagan ad, clearly enraging the president, and not only saying that trade talks were off over the weekend, he threatened an additional 10% tariff levy on Canadians and on Canadian goods coming into the United States. And then finally, at the Apex Summit, to reporters saying, ain't meeting with Mark Carney anytime soon. What do you make of all this? And Sean, does it go to our thesis that we outlined last week that maybe this is about more than an ad here, that the president is clearly frustrated, he's overreacting for sure, but does it suggest, Sean, that there are deeper irritants here in the relationship that maybe we're aware of?
Yeah, I think that's right. Kevin Hassett, a senior economic advisor to the president, essentially said as much over the weekend that, well, the ad may have been the flashpoint for this latest salvo from the president. The truth is the administration is growing frustrated with Canada's position at the negotiating table. We've had a series of meetings between senior officials from the Carney government, both his trade minister, Dominic LeBlanc, as well as senior public servants like the clerk of the Privy Council. And if you're reading between the lines, it sounds like the Americans have come to the view that either those representatives from the Carney government are stalling on key issues, perhaps like supply management and internet regulation and so on, or they're trying to advance an idea of a future of a Canada-U.S. trade relationship just doesn't align with the U.S. administration's focus on the revenues from tariffs, the production incentives stemming from tariffs, etc. The upshot, though, is that we're at a loggerheads by all accounts. And in that context, Richard, you couldn't help but get the sense that the Carney government is increasingly inclined to lay the blame at the feet of Doug Ford, who up until recently, of course, was Mark Carney's chief ally in carrying out the negotiations with the Trump administration.
Yeah. What do you make of the president seemingly not even aware or able to answer a question about when this 10% tariff would be levied on Canada, what it would be levied on? I mean, I get it. He's at APAC, but it does seem like one, he's doing this on the fly, and two,
Yes.
that it seems personal in a way. Like it seems like he's gone up the DEFCON the DEFCON threat meter here, first breaking off talks, then immediately following that up with a statement, that he's not going to be talking to Mark Carney for a long time. And then, coming out and hitting a 10% tariff TBD. What do you make of that? I mean, what does it say about why this president has suddenly made this personal and what seemed like a positive relationship between the president and Mark Carney has suddenly soured? I'm kind of scratching my head about the whiplash I'm sure that Canadian officials are feeling, that Canadians this morning are feeling after being told for weeks by Dominic LeBlanc and other government officials that they were really close to a sectoral deal.
Yeah. There's so much to say in response. Just first of all, on the impulsiveness and lack of sophistication of the administration, sometimes we can lose sight of that. But it's manifested itself just in recent days, as you say, with the president threatening to impose tariffs on what we don't know, when we don't know. Just in parentheses, I was listening to a podcast over the weekend with former Clinton and Obama economic official Jason Furman, who talked about a deep dive that they did in the lead up to the dot-com bubble in the early 2000s about the economic risks of highly leveraged tech sector. I only tell that story because that's the kind of sophistication and level of analysis that one has come to expect from U.S. administrations. And there's reason to doubt that that's happened in the Trump administration with respect to tariffs generally. And then, of course, with respect to the Canada-U.S. relationship more specifically. But on your direct question about why the president and people around him seem increasingly frustrated with Canada, there's a lot of focus on the ads, of course, and the extent to which they represent a kind of a salvo into U.S. domestic politics. But I think that Hassett's comments probably get closer to the heart of the issue. The U.S. has a series of grievances with Canada that, by and large, U.S. administrations have taken a pass on in the past, effectively permitting Canada to maintain supply management and various other issues that advantage Canadian producers at the expense of their American competitors. And you just get the sense, Rudyard, that that is over in the Trump era, that that there is no magnanimity here, that all of those grievances in their minds need to be resolved. And that, of course, imposes really difficult political issues for the Canadians. And so I'm not surprised if LeBlanc and others are trying to resist changes to supply management and internet regulation and CanCon rules and all the rest. The point is, in this new environment, preserving those may simply no longer be an option.
Yeah. Let's finally talk about the two big known unknowns at this point. One, it looks like the United States and China are going to reach some kind of deal at the APEC summit. It's probably not a complete stand down, but it's certainly not China getting whacked with 100% tariffs and Americans being denied rare earth materials for their military industrial complex and other key kind of high-tech manufacturing. What does that mean, Sean, if Trump has basically had the deal done with Japan, Europe, China, in a sense, big economies, big blocks. They're saying that they're dealing with Mexico now separately from Canada. That was news that administration officials shared over the weekend. And then Canada is increasingly the odd man, the odd woman out. That worries me, Sean. It worries me to the extent to which, the president, in a sense, might have the feeling that he doesn't have to have a deal with Canada quickly. Because in his mind, he's resolved the other big trading relationships, and maybe he returns to his 51st state rhetoric. He returns to this idea that has woven through all his appearance with Mark Carney most recently at the White House about a merger between Canada and the United States. This is an idée fixe in the president's mind, and I worry with the China deal seemingly culminating that idée fixe may be given expression to in a way that wouldn't if he was dealing with uncertainty, especially with China, especially with the threat that a Chinese embargo on high-tech manufacturing into the U.S. could result.
Yeah, just to back out the what it means for Canada for a moment, the president's nod towards a deal with China is disappointing, it must be said, at some level. Trump's entire challenge to the political economy orthodoxy over the past decade or so has really been rooted in his argument that elites in the U.S. and elsewhere got it wrong with respect to China. And I basically think he's right about that. And so I guess we'll wait to see what precisely this deal looks like. But in a way, it seems like him affirming a lot of the underlying assumptions of the West policy vis-a-vis China for the better part of the past 30 or 40 years, as opposed to the kind of sharp divergence that a lot of his supporters and many of us who think he's gotten this one right we're hoping. As for what this all means for Canada, I think you're right. There's a story that a lot of elite commentators and policymakers in Canada tell themselves about our leverage vis-a-vis the Trump administration. I think it's fair to say we've always been a bit doubtful about that narrative. But whatever leverage we may have had becomes weaker and weaker in a world in which the United States has signed deals with the other major economies in the world and Canada finds itself on the outside looking in, that's a particular environment where Canada may ultimately need to kind of come to the table and get whatever deal it can. So it's always been a difficult question. What's the right timing and timeline here for Canada? And one wonders, Rudyard, if we may look back over the past year or so and regret that we weren't at the front of the line as opposed to the back of the line, because being at the back may ultimately be bad for Canada.
Final known unknown we got to take up is November 5th. SCOTUS, the U.S. Supreme Court, will take up this appeals court referral on Trump's emergency trade powers. If these powers are struck down or significantly curtailed by the court, which is what the jurisprudence would suggest, I just wonder what the heck does that mean? And in some ways, to end on an optimistic note, could that actually have then been in Canada's favor? Because unlike Japan, unlike Europe, unlike now possibly China, we would not have set a precedent with the United States, regardless of the fact maybe that precedent, that those trade deals are unenforceable because the president's use of his emergency powers was deemed illegal by the court. Those precedents still exist, in the minds of politicians, in the minds of trade negotiators. So to flip this whole thing on its head, if that Supreme Court decision goes the right way, does Canada, in a way, come out ahead because we won't have formalized, some kind of substantial reworking of trade based on a power that the president never had, which was a lot of these illegal, if that indeed is how the ruling goes, trade fiats that he's subjected on us and the rest of the world.
Yeah, one of the things I'm most proud of our coverage and analysis of Trump's tariffs over the past several months has been this jurisprudential question. We had on Hub Hits some time ago one of the lawyers involved in the case litigating that Trump's use of these emergency powers extended beyond his authority and effect meant that they were null and void. Now, of course, that is an issue that's looming over the U.S. economy. It's looming over the global economy. In some ways, as importantly, it's looming over the American political system. You might have listened in recent weeks to different podcasts with Amy Coney Barrett, one of Trump's appointees on the Supreme Court, who has released a book and is talking a lot to different current affairs shows about the role of the U.S. Supreme Court and its relationship to the president and the executive branch. I think this ruling, Rudyard, is so fundamental, not just because it speaks to the subject of tariffs, but it really may be a preview of how the Supreme Court may handle other instances where the president is pushing up against limits on his power, including possibly future elections. So I think your instinct is right that if they do rule that his use of these extraordinary powers is outside of his authority, that could be good for Canada. But I don't know, Rudyard. I worry that it becomes a 6-3 decision in favor of the president, and that actually tells us something more alarming.
That would be very alarming
about the U.S. courts and the guardrails around a president who wants to careen outside of them.
Yeah, I would just end by connecting some dots here. That the president tearing down the east wing of the White House without any approval, extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean against alleged drug traffickers that are totally outside of either war-making powers granted by Congress or generally, the kind of the law of the sea. His shutdown of Congress at this moment and the U.S. government seeming inability to reopen. It almost seems, Sean, as if the tempo, the crescendo, either intentionally or not, is reaching an apex just at the time of this court decision. And it'll be fascinating to see whether the U.S. Supreme Court is intimidated by that or, in fact, finally comes out in the absence of Congress, in the absence of others drawing red lines for this president, takes out a large marker and sets out a limit. It will be a consequential moment for Canada, for the trade negotiations, and I think you're 100% right, for the future of the American Republic. Let's end the show there. Thanks for coming on, breaking this all down. It's a fast-moving situation. Come back to the Hub throughout the day and the week. We'll be covering the latest Trump tariff tantrum carefully in our pages and on our YouTube channel and in our podcast feed. Until next time, bye-bye. This video has been brought to you by Airbnb. A big thank you to Airbnb for sponsoring the Hub's YouTube channel this month. It's great to be the beneficiaries of their support. Here at the Hub, we talk a lot about the housing crisis ongoing in the country. As we know, there are people out there that think that short-term rentals are to blame for taking supply off the market. But here at the Hub, we can feel that doesn't make sense. Consider for a moment that the median number of nights an Airbnb is hosting someone in Canada as a guest is 55. These, frankly, aren't full-time rental properties. They are Canadians trying to get by like the rest of us by finding some additional income through renting out a property they own. Government data supports this. Statistics Canada recently reported the amount of Airbnbs that could actually be converted into long-term homes accounts for only 0.6% of Canada's housing stock. Canada needs solutions to tackle the whole housing market, not just 0.6% of it. We agree. Learn more at airbnb.ca/closer look.